Okay, so yeah, so here is what happens when you load up our homeostasis. There's a couple things to note when you're using homeostasis. You have this particle legend. I would make sure you have this paying attention. I know there's a lot going on your screen, so make sure you keep this um, somewhere that's clearly visible for you. And we'll get started. You can see here, this is what we call our stages. Essentially, this will just run you through the stages of homeostasis in terms of blood glucose regulation. This is looking at it at kind of a macro scale. It doesn't show into any kind of the micro. Um, but essentially, like I said, it's kind of just an overview, general look into it. When you load in, you're just going to have the normal feature, our normal blood glucose regulation turned on. You'll have the beating heart turned on. I also have some couple suggestions to also view the homeostasis a little bit better. I would turn off the beating heart. I just think with everything going on in terms of our glucose particles being throughout the body, I think turning off the beating heart makes it a little bit easier to view everything. As well, in the bottom left-hand corner with our settings icon, I would make sure your background is a darker color because, glucose is white. The white background probably be a little difficult to see, white on white, and that's found in the settings icon. That can be found in this color palette icon right here. You can select different colors. You could do black, you could do gray, but I'll stick with black. I think it's a little easier to view. Another feature I'd recommend is setting in your preferences. This three dot icon right here is the preferences icon. I would make sure that this icon right here is turned off. This is our glossy icon. Essentially, it just kind of, you can see how there's some lighting, there's some glossiness to our organs, but I think it's better if you turn it off, actually. It makes it a little bit clearer. Again, in reference to our glucose being white, it might be a little more difficult to see. So I'd make sure all these options are off. Another thing I would focus on as well is I would zoom in. I think the primary everything is here. You could look at it at a whole scale with the cadaver, but I think essentially looking at our digestive tract here and the upper limb at the end is probably the most efficient in terms of looking at this. That way you can see this a little bit clearer. So I'll just start playing through everything. This is again just the normal. So you can see here how pretty much glucose is circulating throughout the body as these white particles. These yellow particles is just food particles, as you can see here, traversing there. From that point, you can see glucose is then being absorbed from our small intestine all the way into our small intestinal veins right here and the mesenteric. And of course, you can pause it at any point and, select different veins, select different structures. To make this a little bit more interpretive for what you're able to do. So if you want to talk about the absorption through the small intestine walls, you just pause it. Um, Another thing to note here is, unfortunately, the presets icon, it does not work. Currently, there's some issues with it, so I would not use presets. Unfortunately, you can't use presets. So a lot of this is kind of just a play and pause feature. As you can see, we're going through glucose absorption from those small intestines again, and you can see it's leading to our liver, which will soon be our next part, which you can see here with the hepatic portal veins, glucose spreading throughout the liver and the liver is then distributing this further. Now glucose is being distributed throughout. There's more. And of course, you can just also tap on like the next step as well. And you can see also in response, you can see pancreatic detection. As a response to the elevated blood glucose levels, our pancreas is going to soon produce insulin, which you see right here represented in the pink. So you see now insulin is now being produced. And as that insulin is being produced, you will then you can see how our liver is now taking up it, and it will soon, once it kind of goes through everything, there's not really like a play button that you can kind of just drag. It kind of just has to play through. You can see there it turns green. As you can see, glycogenesis is occurring, so glycogen is being produced. You can see it's then being spread throughout. And so that's an example like through the liver. And now you can see insulin is now traveling through the blood vessels all the way to our deltoid muscle, which was just selected for viewing purposes. You can see then it is also muscle glycogenesis is then being produced. And after that, you will see a stabilization of our glucose levels throughout. And at a large scale, you'll see how the glucose should be decreased, be more a normal level compared to when glucose was higher. So that's just the normal feature. To able to more kind of understand how you're seeing the blood glucose levels, we've also included a blood glucose level graph, which is this icon right here. So from here, you can see this overlaid icon. And again, I'm going to drag this a little bit over to our side. And pretty much this is just going to show you the levels. So this will just, if it's a little bit hard to see the glucose levels with the just, looking at the white particles here, you can track it here on this graph. So, and of course, like I said, you can just skip to other steps. So you can see, there the glucose is being upticked. That's why, blood glucose increases. And you can see it's being decreased over time. And then you can see how at the end it was going to stabilize back out here at the end. So you can create a graph like that. The other conditions that we have available is this T1 for T1 diabetes. We have T1 diabetes with an insulin injection, and we have type 2 diabetes. Essentially, you could run these all individually. You can also overlay the graph so you can compare the blood glucose levels. So for instance, if I go to type 1, you can see here how, the process is pretty much the same, of course, noting the major effects of each one of the diabetic conditions. So as you can see here, our glucose is a bit higher and it is elevated as as eventually we cannot really produce insulin. So if it goes to the further step, you can see how nothing is happening. There's no purple, referring to the insulin being produced at any point and being released since our pancreas, our islet cells are not creating that. So as an autoimmune, we aren't T1, you can see, unfortunately cannot produce. And our glucose is extremely high, resulting in our hyperglycemia, which you can see represented here. You can overlay these graphs just as well. So for instance, if I were to do the type 1 with insulin injection, you can see how I have both the normal, I have the type 1, and you should be able to start seeing the type 1 with insulin injection also viewable. So again, the insulin injection, is just simply, a normal, just kind of insulin injection around the abdomen region, basically providing the insulin for obviously people who cannot produce insulin. In that case, due to timing, meal timing, activity level, glucose levels should be represented a bit higher, as you can see here. If I skip ahead, you can see how they are higher than normal, even though insulin is being added to a person who cannot produce insulin, just due to physiological factors at that time. And then obviously you can see the last part, the type 2, so a bit more of a delayed onset of a reaction in terms of, not enough insulin is being produced, which basically provides no reaction, the body becoming resistant, and hyperglycemia, again occurs due to this reaction of, the lack of insulin. So you can see here as I drop more, you can see how insulin is being produced. However, if you notice on the graph, which might be a little cut off, might be also just with since I'm off my PC. Normally you should see the peak, but I think just because my PC, one screen doesn't want to show it. So just be aware of that. And then you can see moving forward, you can see the deltoid, again, due to this insulin resistance, instead of seeing the green for the glucogen being produced or glycogen being produced, apologies, you can see how it's more of a darker color as glycogenesis is being inhibited. Of course, you can see how normally when I'm just tapping on any one of these icons, it's eliciting the graphs. If you want to restart or you just want to focus on maybe two types of conditions, you just want to tap on this refresh icon here. Essentially this, you can run through, and if you simply just want the graphs and to go back in time, you just have to skip to the end. So I could do normal, and then I could just do T2, go to the end, and you can see the comparison, and you can discuss further from there. Technically between steps, so every time it hits one of these nodes, it's kind of like the stage has been preset for you, so it's kind of reset the view. But between modes, you can actually pay attention. So if I were to go here, I'll go to the middle and I'll kind of, remove out everything. I can zoom in to this pancreas. And if you really want to focus on pancreas, your visibility icon, the eyeball icon, is still available. So for instance, I could just go here. I could just deselect if it's just a little bit more clear for yourself as well. And then I can just focus on maybe just the pancreas in this regards. And then if I play it, you can see how I just have the structures. But you'll notice as soon as I hit the node, it's going to refresh my view back to the standard view. So between nodes, you can adjust the view to focus on maybe a region. So in instance, I just tried to focus on the pancreas since insulin is a bit being produced at this point. But again, you can unfortunately use presets. You still have your slider bar, so this indicates, all our layers. That is still a factor. However, obviously, it might be a little bit more difficult, the more structures you bring back to really see all the, effects and where our particles are existing on our cadaver. So usually this standard view is usually good enough for everything that you want to see. Another good pointer that you can also do is set out these pins. So if there's various locations, like you want to note the small intestine, you want to note the liver, you want to note the pancreas, you want to note any kind of the veins or vessels of interest. You can also set your pins just as well. So this way you can also visually, maybe have your students to note, hey, what is this structure? Since it's not going to tell us what structure it is, so you could place the structure there and you can be like in a worksheet per se and be like, okay, write down what number one is, pancreas, of course, and just place pins that way. So that's another thing you could do in terms of interaction with each one of the pins. And you can see how the pin stays regardless. So you don't have to worry about that. You just have to worry about structures will adjust. But besides that, that's pretty much the gist of the homeostasis feature. Again, looking at everything in blood glucose regulation at a macro scale. And yeah, thanks for joining. I'll also drop a how-to document, just kind of overviewing the icons I talked about today. So give me 1 second for that.